The phone call came at 3 in the morning, and Jessica Harper knew, before answering, that her world was about to shatter into a million pieces. "Miss Harper, this is Captain Reynolds from the Maritime Safety Authority. I'm afraid there's been an accident involving the research vessel Meridian." The words that followed blurred together. Storm, capsized, search and rescue, missing, presumed dead. But the only thing Jessica could focus on was the name Preston Cole, the man she loved, the man she was supposed to marry in 6 months, lost somewhere in the Pacific Ocean. The funeral 3 weeks later felt surreal. They buried an empty casket while Jessica stood in the rain, refusing to cry because crying meant accepting it was real. Preston's mother clutched her arm, both of them hollow shells of who they'd been. He'd been on that ship studying marine ecosystems, passionate about his work as an environmental researcher. At 32, he'd already published groundbreaking papers on ocean conservation. He'd promised her this would be his last long trip before they settled down. "He loved you so much," Margaret Cole whispered, her voice breaking. "He was going to come home and marry you." Jessica nodded, unable to speak. The diamond ring on her finger felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. The first year was the hardest. Jessica moved through life mechanically, going to her job as a freelance graphic designer, eating when she remembered, sleeping when exhaustion finally overtook her. Friends tried to set her up on dates. Her sister Claire begged her to move on, but how could she? Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Preston smile, heard his laugh, felt his arms around her. She kept his things exactly as he'd left them. His leather jacket still hung by the door. His coffee mug sat in the cabinet. His toothbrush remained in the holder, though she'd finally thrown away the toothpaste when it dried out completely. People said she was living in a mausoleum, but they didn't understand. Moving on meant forgetting, and forgetting felt like a betrayal. By the second year, Jessica had developed a routine. She'd wake up, make coffee, work on design projects for clients, and spend evenings walking along the harbor where she and Preston used to watch the sunset. She wore his old college sweatshirt around the apartment. She still said good morning to his picture on the nightstand. Her therapist called it complicated grief. Jessica called it loyalty. "You're 28 years old," Claire said during one of their increasingly tense dinners. "Jessica, you have to let him go. He wouldn't want you living like this." "You don't know what he'd want," Jessica replied quietly. "I do. He'd want me to remember him, to honor what we had. Remembering and refusing to live are two different things." But Jessica couldn't explain it. Something deep in her bones refused to accept that Preston was truly gone. She had no proof, just a feeling that wouldn't let her rest. The official report said there were no survivors, but they'd never found his body. That had to mean something. The third year brought a strange kind of peace. Jessica had learned to exist in her grief rather than fight it. She took on bigger design projects, even won an award for a campaign she'd created for an ocean conservation nonprofit. It felt like a way to keep Preston's passion alive. She still wore her engagement ring, still slept on her side of the bed, still set the table for 2 out of habit before catching herself. Margaret Cole visited less frequently now. She gently suggested that Jessica might want to consider moving forward, maybe dating again. The older woman had remarried, finding comfort in companionship, but Jessica couldn't imagine opening her heart to anyone else. It felt like trying to replace someone irreplaceable. "I'm not saying forget Preston," Margaret had said during her last visit, tears in her eyes. "But honey, he's gone. You have to accept that." Jessica just hugged her and changed the subject. Year 4 brought challenges. Her lease was ending and the landlord wanted to sell the apartment. Jessica panicked at the thought of leaving the home she'd shared with Preston, even though he'd only lived there for 8 months before the accident. She found a new place eventually, a small cottage near the water, and carefully transported all of Preston's belongings. The jacket, the books, the watch he'd left on the dresser, his running shoes, everything. Friends had mostly stopped inviting her places. Claire still called weekly, but their conversations were stilted, dancing around the elephant in the room. Jessica knew people talked about her, the woman who couldn't let go, the one stuck in the past. Let them talk. They hadn't loved Preston. They didn't understand. She dated once just to prove to herself she'd tried. A nice man named David who worked at the coffee shop she frequented. They'd gone to dinner, made polite conversation, and at the end of the evening when he'd walked her home, Jessica had felt absolutely nothing. Worse than nothing. She'd felt guilty, like she was cheating on a ghost. She'd apologized, told him she wasn't ready, and he'd been kind about it. She never went back to that coffee shop. By year 5, Jessica had built a life that accommodated her grief rather than challenged it. She worked from home mostly, took long walks, visited Margaret once a month. She'd stopped wearing makeup, stopped caring about fashion. What was the point? The only person she'd ever wanted to look beautiful for was gone. It was a Tuesday in October when everything changed. Jessica was at the Harbor, sitting on their bench, the one with the little plaque that now read in memory of Preston Cole. She came here every week, sometimes more. The sunset was painting the sky orange and pink, and she was telling Preston about her day like she always did, when a voice behind her made her blood turn to ice. Jessie? Only one person had ever called her Jessie. Only one person made that name sound like a prayer and a promise all at once. She turned slowly, afraid that if she moved too fast the hallucination would disappear. But there, standing 20 feet away, was Preston Cole. Thinner, with a beard and sun-weathered skin, his hair longer than she'd ever seen it, but unmistakably, impossibly him. Jessica stood on shaking legs. The world tilted. This wasn't real. This couldn't be real. She'd finally cracked. Her grief had finally broken her completely. "Jessie, it's me." His voice cracked, and he took a tentative step forward. "I know this is impossible. I know what you must have thought, what everyone thought. But I'm here. I'm real." She couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Her vision tunneled until all she could see was his face, older and harder than she remembered, but his. Those were his green eyes. That was his crooked nose from the soccer injury in college. That was the scar on his chin from falling off his bike as a kid. "Preston?" The word came out as barely a whisper. "It's me, sweetheart. It's really me." Jessica's legs gave out. Preston crossed the distance between them in seconds, catching her before she hit the ground. His arms felt solid, real, warm. This wasn't a dream. Dreams didn't feel like this. She grabbed his shirt, his shoulders, his face, needing to confirm through touch what her eyes were telling her. "You're dead," she said, the words stupid and inadequate. "They told me you were dead. I know." "God, Jessie, I know. I'm so sorry." His voice broke and she realized he was crying. "I'm so sorry for what you've been through." She pulled back enough to look at him properly. He looked different, harder. There were lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before, a wariness in his expression she didn't recognize. But it was him. It was really him. "How?" she demanded, her shock giving way to a desperate need for answers. "How are you here? Where have you been?" 5 years, Preston, 5 years. I know, and I'll explain everything, I promise. But first." He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away tears she hadn't realized were falling. "First, I need to know, are you okay? Please tell me you're okay." The concern in his eyes, the tenderness in his touch, it was too much. Jessica had spent 5 years being strong, being numb, surviving. And now, with him here, real and alive and touching her, every wall she'd built came crashing down. She started sobbing, great heaving sobs that shook her whole body. Preston pulled her against his chest, holding her tight, murmuring apologies and endearments while she fell completely apart. They sank down onto the bench together, her clutching him like he might disappear if she let go. "I waited," she gasped between sobs. "Everyone said I was crazy, but I waited for you." His arms tightened around her. "I know. God, Jessie, I know you did. I saw the ring. You're still wearing your ring." They stayed like that until the sun finished setting and stars began appearing overhead. Finally, Jessica's tears subsided enough for her to pull back, though she kept one hand fisted in his shirt. "Tell me," she said. "Tell me everything." Preston took a shaky breath. "The ship went down in the storm, just like they reported. I was thrown overboard, hit my head on debris." When I woke up, I was on a beach on a tiny island, maybe 2 miles across, uninhabited, remote. I later learned it wasn't even on most maps. Jessica listened, horror growing with each word. I survived, he continued, his voice hollow. Built shelter, found food and water. But I had no way to signal for help. No ships passed close enough to see my fires. I tried for months, Jessie. Every day I tried. 5 years, she whispered. You were alone for 5 years. No. After about 8 months, a research team landed. They were studying bird migration patterns. They got me to their base on a larger island, but he paused, pain flickering across his face. They were from a tiny nonprofit, barely any funding. Their satellite phone was broken. They were waiting for their supply boat to come in 6 months. 6 months, I thought it would be okay. I thought I could wait 6 months, get back to you. But when the boat finally came, there was a political situation. The country that island belonged to had severed diplomatic relations with the U.S. They wouldn't let me leave, said I needed special clearance, that it could take time. Jessica felt sick. How long? 2 years. I spent 2 years fighting bureaucracy, living in a tiny research station, writing letters that never got sent, making calls on a terrible phone connection that kept dropping. No internet. No real communication. And every day, every single day, I thought about you. But that's only 3 years, Jessica said, her mind racing. Where were you for the other 2? Preston's jaw clenched. When I finally got clearance to leave, I flew to Manila to catch a flight home, but there was an issue with my documents. Since I'd been declared legally dead, all my identification was invalid. The embassy had to verify my identity, issue new documents. It should have taken weeks. It took months. Then, when that was finally sorted, I tried to come home, but my accounts were frozen. All my money, my assets, everything was tied up in probate. Oh my God. I had nothing, Jessie. No money, no credit cards, no way to book a flight. I worked odd jobs, construction mostly, saving every penny. It took another 1.5 years to save enough and navigate all the legal red tape to get home. Jessica's head was spinning. It sounded impossible, but looking at him, at the exhaustion in his eyes and the weight he carried, she knew it was true. I'm so sorry, Preston said, his voice breaking again. If I could have gotten to you sooner, I would have. Every day away from you was torture. I thought about you constantly. Wondered if you'd moved on, if you'd met someone else. I wouldn't have blamed you, but God, I hoped you'd wait. I never stopped waiting, Jessica said fiercely. Everyone thought I was crazy, my sister, your mom, my friends. They all said I needed to move on, but I couldn't. Something inside me knew you were still out there. Preston made a sound halfway between a laugh and a sob. You're wearing your ring. She looked down at the diamond on her finger, the symbol of a promise made a lifetime ago. I never took it off. Not once. He pulled her close again, and they held each other as the night deepened around them. Eventually, practical concerns intruded. Jessica pulled back reluctantly. You need to call your mother, Preston. She thinks you're dead. She remarried. I know. I called her from the airport. Gave her a heart attack, probably. She's who told me you still lived in the area, that you might be at the harbor. She wanted to come with me, but I needed to see you alone first. He paused. She remarried to a wonderful man named Frank. They're happy. She grieved for you terribly, Preston. We all did. And you, he asked quietly, did you meet anyone? Once. 1 date in 4 years. It was a disaster. I felt like I was betraying you the entire time. She touched his face, still hardly believing he was real. There was never anyone else. There could never be anyone else. Preston kissed her then, gentle and tentative, like he was afraid she might break. Jessica kissed him back, tasting salt from both their tears. It felt like coming home and discovering a new country all at once. He was familiar yet foreign, her Preston, but changed by years of hardship. When they finally broke apart, Preston rested his forehead against hers. I need to tell you something else, something important. Jessica's stomach dropped. What? The research team that found me, they were part of a project funded by a tech billionaire named Robert Chen. He was investing in environmental causes, ocean conservation specifically. While I was stuck on that island, I had nothing but time, I wrote. Research papers, theories, comprehensive plans for ocean conservation initiatives. When I finally got to Manila and could access the internet, I sent everything to Chen. Okay, Jessica said slowly, not sure where this was going. He was impressed. Really impressed. He wanted to fund my research, turn my ideas into reality. But with me legally dead and dealing with all the red tape, we couldn't move forward. So we made a deal. Once I was declared alive again and got home, he'd give me the funding. Not just for research, Jessie. He wanted me to head an entire foundation. His initial investment was $25 million. Jessica's eyes widened. $25 million. I spent the last few months in Manila working with lawyers, setting everything up. The Cole Foundation for Ocean Conservation. It's real, it's funded, and it launches next month. He took her hands. But that's not the important part. The important part is that I get a salary and it's substantial, very substantial. Plus, Chen made me a partner in some of his ventures. Jessie, I'm wealthy now, genuinely wealthy. Not just comfortable, but millionaire wealthy. She stared at him, struggling to process this information on top of everything else. You're a millionaire? Yes, and I know that's a lot to take in, especially right now, but I needed you to know before we go any further, my life is different now. I'm different. The foundation will require travel, long hours, major commitments, and the money changes things whether we want it to or not. Jessica was quiet for a long moment thinking. Finally, she said, the money doesn't matter to me. I don't care if you're a millionaire or broke. I waited 5 years for the man I loved. For you, that hasn't changed. Relief flooded Preston's face. I was hoping you'd say that, because I've spent 5 years fighting to get back to you, and I'm not letting anything keep us apart now. Not money, not my job, nothing. Your mom said you were going to come home and marry me, Jessica said softly, before the trip. That was the plan. I was going to propose properly when I got back, surprise you with a better ring. He looked down at the engagement ring she wore, but you already had one. You proposed to me a year before the trip. Don't you remember? We were at your apartment eating terrible takeout and you just blurted it out. Preston laughed, the sound rusty but genuine. I remember, you said yes before I even finished asking. Best decision I ever made. Jessica took a deep breath. So what now? Now, Preston stood, pulling her up with him. Now I take you home, wherever home is for you these days. We talk all night if that's what you need. We call everyone and deal with the shock and questions. We figure out how to navigate me being alive again. He cupped her face, his expression intense. And then when the dust settles, we get married, for real this time if you still want to. If I still want to. Jessica felt tears threatening again. Preston, I've wanted nothing else for 5 years. Then marry me, Jessie. Not someday, not eventually, soon as we can make it happen. Yes, she said, just like she had all those years ago. Yes, absolutely yes. They left the harbor hand in hand, Jessica leading him to her cottage. She told him about losing the apartment, about moving, about building a life in his absence. He told her more about the island, about the research station, about nights spent staring at stars and thinking of her. At the cottage, Preston stopped in the doorway, staring. Jessica followed his gaze and saw what he was seeing. His jacket on the hook, his books on the shelf, his watch on the table, his running shoes by the door. You kept everything, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Of course I did. This is your home too, it always was. Preston pulled her into his arms, holding her so tight she could barely breathe. I don't deserve you. You survived 5 years of hell to get back to me. I think we deserve each other. They spent the night talking, filling in gaps, sharing stories. Jessica told him about the funeral, about the first horrible year, about learning to live with grief. Preston told her about the loneliness, the desperation, the moments he'd almost given up hope. They cried together, laughed together, held each other through the hard parts. Around 3 in the morning, exhaustion finally caught up with them. They lay down on Jessica's bed, still clothed, wrapped around each other. Is this real? Jessica whispered into the darkness. Are you really here? I'm really here, Preston promised, and I'm never leaving you again. The next few weeks were chaos. Preston had to be legally declared alive, which involved mountains of paperwork and testimony. The story made national news when it broke. Environmental researcher survives shipwreck, spends 5 years trying to get home. Reporters camped outside Jessica's cottage. Preston's face was everywhere. Through it all, Jessica stayed by his side. She helped him navigate the media circus, fielded calls, managed the insanity. Margaret and Frank came to visit, and there were tears and hugs and disbelief. Preston met Frank and immediately liked him, grateful someone had been there for his mother. Claire was skeptical at first, protective of her sister who'd spent 5 years in limbo. But when she saw Jessica with Preston, saw the way they looked at each other, she softened. "I still think you're both crazy," she said over dinner one night. "But you're crazy together, so I guess it works." The Cole Foundation launched to significant fanfare. Preston did interviews, explaining his vision for ocean conservation, his research, his plans. The environmental community rallied around him. Funding poured in beyond Chen's initial investment. Preston hired a team, rented office space, threw himself into the work he'd dreamed about for 5 years. But he never lost sight of what mattered most. Every evening, no matter how busy his day had been, he came home to Jessica. They'd cook dinner together, walk along the harbor, talk about their days. Slowly, they learned each other again. The old Preston was still there, but he'd been tempered by hardship. He was more serious, more focused, but also more appreciative of small moments. He didn't take anything for granted anymore. Jessica found herself changing too. Preston's return had breathed life back into her. She started dressing up again, wearing makeup, caring about things beyond just survival. Her design work improved, clients noticing a new energy in her projects. She began collaborating with the foundation, designing marketing materials and campaigns. They set a date for the wedding, 6 months after Preston's return. Small and intimate, just family and close friends. No media circus, no public spectacle. Just them, finally keeping the promise they'd made to each other. Jessica wore a simple white dress. Preston wore a suit that actually fit him now that he'd regained weight and started looking healthy again. Margaret cried through the entire ceremony. Claire stood as maid of honor, watching her sister finally get the happiness she'd fought so hard to keep faith in. When the minister asked if they took each other as husband and wife, both said, "I do," like they were making a sacred vow. And then they were married, officially and completely, 5.5 years after they should have been. At the reception, Preston pulled Jessica onto the dance floor. They swayed together to their song, the same one they'd picked out all those years ago for the wedding that never happened. "Worth the wait," Preston murmured against her hair. Jessica pulled back to look at him, this man who'd fought oceans and bureaucracy and fate itself to get back to her. "Every single second. I love you, Jessie. I loved you on that island in Manila, every moment in between, and I'll love you for whatever time we have left. We have a lifetime," she said firmly. "No more disasters, no more separations, just us, building the life we were always meant to have." "Just us," he agreed, and kissed her while their friends and family cheered. The foundation thrived over the next year. Preston's research was revolutionary, his conservation initiatives making real differences. He traveled for work, but never for more than a few days, and Jessica often went with him. They bought a house together, bigger than the cottage but still close to the water. They talked about starting a family, about the future they'd been denied. On the anniversary of Preston's return, they went back to the harbor bench where everything had changed. The plaque that had been a memorial was now just a reminder of how close they'd come to losing each other. "You ever think about what would have happened if I'd moved on?" Jessica asked, watching the sunset paint the sky in familiar colors. "If I'd taken off my ring and dated someone else," Preston was quiet for a moment. "Sometimes, and honestly, I would have understood, I wouldn't have blamed you, but I'm so grateful you didn't. You gave me something to fight for, Jessie. On those worst days when I wanted to give up, I thought about you, about getting back to you. You saved my life in more ways than one. You saved mine too. Before you came back, I was just existing, going through the motions. You gave me my life back." "We gave each other our lives back," Preston corrected. He pulled a small box from his pocket. "Which is why I got you this." Jessica opened it to find a new engagement ring, beautiful and delicate with a band that matched her original ring perfectly. "Preston, you didn't have to do this." "I know, but I wanted to. You wore that ring for 5 years while I was gone. You deserved a proper proposal, a proper ring, all of it, so I'm asking again." He got down on one knee right there on the bench. "Jessica Harper Cole, will you continue to be my wife, my partner, my everything for the rest of our lives?" Jessica laughed through happy tears. "I'm already your wife, you ridiculous man. I know, but I wanted to ask again anyway." "Then yes, 1,000 times yes." He slipped the new ring onto her finger next to the original, both of them glinting in the fading light. They sat together on the bench as night fell, planning their future. 3 years later, Jessica stood in the nursery of their home, rocking their daughter Patricia to sleep. Preston came in quietly, wrapping his arms around both of them. "She has your eyes," he whispered. "She has your stubborn streak," Jessica countered with a smile. "She fought sleep for an hour, that's my girl." Preston kissed the baby's head, then Jessica's. "I have news. The foundation just got another major grant. We're expanding operations to the Atlantic." "That's wonderful. Will you need to travel?" "Some. But I was thinking you and Patricia could come with me, make it a family trip." "I meant what I said, Jessie. I'm never spending time away from you two unless absolutely necessary." Jessica looked up at her husband, this man who'd survived the impossible and fought his way back to her. They'd been tested in ways most couples never faced, forced apart by circumstances beyond their control. But they'd held on. They'd waited. They'd believed, and now, finally, they had everything they'd ever wanted: a life together, a family, a future full of promise. The 5 years of separation felt like a lifetime ago, but the memory kept them grounded, reminded them never to take a single moment for granted. "I love you," Jessica said, the words carrying the weight of 5 years of waiting, of grief transformed into joy, of a love that had survived everything the world threw at it. "I love you too," Preston replied, holding his whole world in his arms. "Thank you for waiting for me. I'd wait forever if I had to, but I'm glad I don't have to anymore." They stood together in the soft glow of the nursery lamp, a family reunited and complete. Outside, the ocean waves rolled onto the shore in an eternal rhythm, the same waves that had tried to keep them apart. But love, Jessica thought, was stronger than any ocean. Love could survive anything when two people refused to let go, and they never would.